Thank you, Dr. Whitmer. This was an excellent discussion with very, very nicely defined terms that are complex in a subject that's impacted many, many of us. And we're hoping for a lot of engagement with lifestyle interventions to try to help minimize risk and reverse this risk factor for disease. We had a number of questions that came in, and one of the discussions crosses over into some of the genetic predisposing factors. How should we think about our ApoE status? Many of us have learned from genetic testing services that we're ApoE4 carriers. How do you think about that? What should we do about that kind of information?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So having ApoE4 is not necessarily a rare thing. It kind of ranges in the population from 20 to 30%. It does elevate risk, but the nice thing about that information is that there's been work looking at risk factors and lifestyle changes, and people who are carrying E4 seem to benefit even more from making lifestyle changes. I think it's also very important to understand that having E4 does not mean at all 100% that you are going to get Alzheimer's disease or a related dementia. It elevates your risk, but it does not mean that you are for sure going to get it. So I think about it as part of the information. And when I think about my own brain health and what I should be doing to maintain my brain health, understanding that gives me information to feel empowered to make lifestyle choices. And I think it's great to know that people who are E4 seem to benefit even more from these lifestyle changes.
Yeah, that's a really encouraging thing to keep in mind. Are there any other genetic predispositions that are being looked at in terms of influencing our urgency toward making some of these lifestyle interventions to have the maximum impact?
Yeah, there's a lot of work being done right now, trying to understand how groups of genes work together. We haven't been able to find a genotype, such as E4. We haven't been able to find more of those, but there are things called propensity risk scores, and people are looking at clusters of genes. This is relatively new work, and I think we're going to see some exciting findings coming out in the next few years to understand how people who have a higher genetic risk score, which means having a number of SNPs that very slightly elevate risk, but perhaps having some of them or combinations of them, how does that play out when we understand risk and resilience over time? So I think we'll see some new findings in the next 5 years on that.
Yeah, that's excellent. I have a question specifically from somebody who is mentioning, I'm already in my early 80s and can't do anything about my earlier choices. I'm wanting to know what I can do now from a protective mechanism to prevent further decline. How can I be preventive now in my 80s when I've got a whole decades-long health risk accumulation that is present? You mentioned in your excellent slide, broken down by different stages of life, many high impact areas that we focus on, like the social isolation, hearing, vision. What would you say to somebody in their early 80s who's really wanting to be proactive moving forward?
Yeah, I'm very passionate about this topic. We do have a study where everyone is in their 90s. And it's true, you can't do time travel. So what do you do today? And I think what's really come to light is that at any age, but I think particularly even later in life, it's important to stay active and to stay active both physically and mentally. There's a lot of studies out there looking at social interaction, social engagement, physical activity. There's some wonderful studies that have looked at people, at how they spend their time. And so even spending time outside. So there was a study that compared people who exercised and then also people who exercised outside. And exercising outside, so taking a walk outside versus in an indoor track, people being outside, it seemed to particularly affect their brain health and their happiness. So things that we want to avoid are being sedentary, being inactive, and you want to avoid social isolation. And I think this becomes really it's very important, but it becomes even more important, very late in life. So I think staying engaged, interacting, being outside, being active. We've also done some work looking at volunteerism. So people who volunteer have better cognitive function. And we've also done some work looking at people who do education later in life. And it doesn't even necessarily mean going back to college per se, but participating in seminars, courses, certificates, online workshops. Those all seem to benefit brain health as well.
I love the scope of all of those things that you're looking at. I think that there's something for everybody there to engage with. Yeah, even with limited mobility issues and access and those things. Yeah, that's wonderful. What about the risk factors in terms of what you mentioned and the lifestyle interventions? How would you comment on the risk factors, but with people who are undergoing treatment with medication? How does that impact risk? So these are risk factors that they have, say hypertension or elevated LDL. A person is currently being treated with medication to modify those risk factors. How does that impact their risk for dementia moving forward?
Yeah, that's a very important point because we know what's good for the heart is good for the brain. And cardiometabolic risk factors, particularly over the lifetime, do play a role in your brain health late in life. But absolutely, if you are being treated, then one, you're doing everything that you can. And two, it absolutely benefits your brain. So, one perfect example is that if you have type 2 diabetes, which is becoming more common, it is really important to make sure that your glycemic control is appropriate, which of course is something that your doctor would be working with you on anyway. But this is just another great outcome, is that not only trying to avoid complications of diabetes, of course, that's the main reason for appropriate blood sugar and appropriate glycemic control, but it's also really good for your brain, and it's really good for your brain over the long term. We've done some work looking at blood sugar control and glycemic control over one or more decades. And we saw that people that had appropriate control over their lifetime were at much lower risk of dementia. So treating these risk factors absolutely is good for your brain.
Yeah, that's excellent. Could you comment on the impact of lipoprotein A, another genetic marker, on microvascular disease? Any solutions around that for people who've had a little bit more advanced testing related to those cardiovascular risk factors?
Okay, so this question is about lipoprotein A specifically.
Correct.
Yeah, something I've been thinking about a lot because there's some family history. And it is mostly, I think, as you know as well, there are some genes that seem to make people's lipoprotein A levels very high. There is not a typical treatment in how to lower lipoprotein A. But what I think is very important is that if you do have high lipoprotein A, then I think it's even more important to think about controlling your what we call your bad cholesterol, so your low density lipids. And that was something new that came out in the Lancet report, was that they weren't talking so much about high cholesterol in general, but that low density lipid, which is the bad cholesterol, seems to have emerged as playing more of a role in being a modifiable risk factor. So I think if you have high lipoprotein A, that's even more reason to think about really trying to control the rest of your cardiovascular risk factors. There are some studies right now underway, so I don't have the results yet, but there are some studies right now that are actually looking at this question at lipoprotein A and how that is associated with cognitive changes. So I don't have the answer on it yet, but that is actually being done now.
Thank you for that. Back to a lifestyle question, in terms of impact of behavioral interventions, things that patients might be taking recreationally with marijuana or the use of psychedelics. Any comment on how those impact brain health specifically?
I think that's a really relevant and timely question. Excuse me. There's been a large increase in both of those things, at a population level, and particularly in our younger population and for our young people. And so we really do need to understand how it affects brain health, and we do need to understand how it affects brain health over the long term. I don't know currently of any, clinical trials that are examining this. So the bulk of the evidence on exposure to marijuana is based on what we call retrospective studies, where we're interviewing people that are older, we're measuring their cognitive function, and we're asking them about their prior use. And there was a study that came out of the Cardia study, which is a very large study following people's cardiovascular risk factors. It's being done, I believe, at 5 sites. California is one of the sites. It's a long-term observational study. There was one study that came out that showed a modest association between people who reported prior. So these are people in their 50s, but they reported that prior, like when they were in their 20s or their 30s, they had a high use of marijuana. Their cognitive function was slightly worse than their counterparts who had not reported that. So that's observational data. It's not a clinical trial, but I think the question is out there as what does this mean today? Because we know that the marijuana products today are very, very different from the marijuana of yesterday and have much higher concentrations of THC. And we know that in the short term, it absolutely can affect processing speed and mental health. What does this mean over the long term? So what are the young people of today? What are they going to look like in 40, 50, 60 years when they are older later in life? And we don't have that answer yet. So I think we need to focus on the short-term studies, which seems to suggest probably not something good for brain health.
Yeah, particularly important, it sounds like, for a critical window in the younger population. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
outstanding.